What is up, guys? It is Sam here, and I wanted to talk about student loan debt. Yeah, super exciting, right? I have $110 roughly $1,000 of student loan debt, and I want to talk about that a little bit. But before I do that, make sure you press that red button that says subscribe, and there's a little bell notification. So you know what happens when you press that bell notification? YouTube gives it a little hug with these parentheses. It's kind of like hugging the channel, so you should press that bell notification as well. Now, with that being said, let's get into it. So, some interesting thing came out the other day. Today is 5/13/2019, and on May 9th, there was a press release. I'm just going to read you the title. Durbin, Warren, Nader, and Kate, I have no idea how to say that name, Katko, introduced bill making bankruptcy relief available for student loan borrowers. So if you have student loan debt, you probably are aware that it is very difficult to extinguish that debt through bankruptcy. Under the current law, my voice almost cracked there. Under the current law, it is stated that under undue hardship, that the debt can be extinguished. It is the only consumable debt that is not, and I'm looking at some of the other definitions here, is basically the only consumable debt that is not extinguishable for people to start over or to get rid of through bankruptcy. Some other things are like, taxes, child support, alimony, criminal fines. All of those you cannot get rid of through bankruptcy. So those kind of make sense, right? And I could see the logic behind that. Now, I think it was back in 1976 is when, before 1976, both public and private student loan debt was able to get extinguished through bankruptcy. And I would bet that back in 1976, and this is, by the way, let's like put some type of context right here. This is conjecture. But for those of you who know how the world actually works, I would have a feeling this probably played out in some fashion back in the day, right? 40 years ago or whatever that was. More than likely, there were some friends or that were in, I would bet, in finance, who suggested to some other friends who were politicians that this would give students have an incentive to go borrow lots of debt and then just file bankruptcy. But I think that there could be some potential bad characters. Maybe there was one financier where this happened to them, but more than likely it was like, well, if we have this secured by the government, we can actually get different rates to be able to sell this to investors, this student loan debt, right? And if somebody can't get rid of this debt through bankruptcy, or it's very challenging to do that, then, well, that means I can carry it on my books with a very low probability that there's going to be any bad debt, right? So you get to make your books look better. So one of the things what you do is if you have some type of AR, like account receivable or some note or mortgage or whatever on your balance sheet, you also have a sub-account or another account that goes with it, and there's a specific name in accounting that goes with it. So you have the regular account, say your mortgages, and you've got all of this, and then there's a bad debt account. And the bad debt account, generally there's different ways of calculating it, but it's going to be based upon what the historical trend is and then forecasting that going forward. So if you were to look and say, on average, 1.5% of people do not pay, or whatever the case is, then something like this happens. Now, on a complete tangent, think about like how things might potentially progress into the future if, and this is obviously conjecture, but if there's a large portion of Americans, nearly 50 million Americans, right? So that's like a sixth, a seventh of the entire population, which more than likely, if they have student loan debt, are probably of working age. But as I'm going to get into in a minute, that's not going to be all of them. And obviously this is going to be on the fringe of this, right, would potentially want to avoid paying their student loans, but know they can't extinguish them through bankruptcy, so they would potentially have an incentive to use other ways to facilitate their lifestyle, i.e. cryptocurrency of some sort. Anyways, back to the topic here. And, excuse me. So, prior to 1976, as I was mentioning, you could get rid of your student loan debt. After that, I think there was actually two iterations. It was from 1976 to about 10 years later or so, and then they had made it for 5 years you couldn't get rid of it in bankruptcy. Then it went to 7 years, and then around 2000, I think it was. Here it is. In 2005, Congress made private student loans non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. So that right there it creates incentives for schools and whatnot to remember back to 2008 and how MDS or like CDSs or basically how, if you don't know about like credit default swaps and other things, essentially companies had an incentive to inflate the ratings of whatever their debt that they were selling, or structuring it in such a way so that they could get a higher return for themselves and sell it for more. You could see something else like this playing out with student loans. Like it's like, holy fuck, this is a very similar thing playing out. We're just not using MDOs anymore to do this kind of thing. So it's pretty interesting. Anyways, so this would allow people, and I don't have the specifics, but I do have the press release from Dick Durbin's Illinois website, and this would allow Americans to get rid of their student loan debt. Think about that for a second. So I have $110,000 of student loan debt roughly. And I like finance, and I've liked finance for a long time. And I would not say that there was a clear understanding of what the fuck I was doing, whatever, 10 years ago, when I took that step forwards. And I'm not saying like that I would go file bankruptcy, but I do think that there's other people who maybe I knew that student loans I couldn't get rid of through bankruptcy. I knew that I was going to have to pay them back. And I'm not saying I would actually even change the decision I made. But I do think this could be good for a lot of people who went through different circumstances, or who have if you go to a school, hypothetically, right, the school doesn't have any incentive to go over some of the issues that could arise with students after they get out of school. And in a sense, they almost have a disincentive to educate the students coming to the school to not get student loans or seek other options to finance their way through school, if that's what they even want to do. Because if the credit worthiness of the students is getting propped up artificially by a seems to be arbitrary law that allows people not to default or not to discharge any of their student loans. If this were to go through, there's a lot of people who are resting up against that wall, right? And if that wall is removed, there's a lot of people. I'm not saying that's going to be 50 million people, but there's probably a decent percentage of that 50 million people, even if it's, 5 million people and it's 10% or half of that, right? If you have 2.5 million people who all go into bankruptcy to get rid of their student loan debts, this is going to have a ripple effect, especially as some of those people who are really up against the wall and they can't get their shit together for whatever reason, whether that's, I think a lot of people need to take responsibility for their own actions, but I understand how certain people can go through medical hardships or just life circumstances and be in a spot where they're really struggling with this. So I think this is a awesome thing, and I wanted to talk about what you can do if this is something that you would support. So I'm not a Democrat, and I wouldn't say I'm a Republican. I think that I'm probably a little more liberal from a social standpoint, but from a business standpoint, I would go probably more Republican. And this is actually supported by bipartisan or whatever. I wanted to get into some of the details on how you can go through and actually support this if this was something that was interesting to you or you wanted to get behind or at least voice your opinion. So there's a couple things as far as I know, right? You can go through. It's a very interesting stat. There is a growing portion of people over the age of 60 with student loan debt. Like, just in the past, in less than 10 years, it looks like probably in the last 5 years, the people who are over the age of 60 who have student loans has more than doubled. That's crazy. That's just fucking insane. Absolutely insane. The student loan debt in the U.S. is in the last, I think it said from 2007 to 2018, right? So 12 years roughly, or 13 years, has, 11 years I think that is, has increased by 157%. So then I was curious, and I pulled up Statica, which is just they provide statistics for different things for the mortgage industry in the United States. And this is the value of mortgage debt outstanding in the United States from 2001 to 2018. And I wanted to look at it from 2007 to 2018 relative to student loan debt. So you get to see the pace of change, right? The slope of the increase. And student loan debt, according to CNN, were CNBC or whatever, are increasing 157% between the 2007 and 2018. Mortgages, according to Statistica, have increased by about 5.5%. So literally almost, that's over a 10x increase over the other one. Well over, right? A 10, 20, a 25x increase. That's insane how quickly student loan debt is growing relative to mortgages here in the United States. That's absolutely insane. Anyways, to get back to my point, if you want to support something like this, I'll go through, literally call your senator, the name, and give them the name of the bill. First of all, subscribe. You should do that, especially if you're still watching at this point in the video after me rambling for 10 minutes. It's called the Student Borrower Bankruptcy Relief Act of 2019. Actually, leave off the Student Borrower Bankruptcy Relief Act of 2019. Call your senator. So just Google whatever state you're in. Just Google that senator. So say this guy Dick Durbin. It says he's DIL. So what that means is he's a Democrat in Illinois. Elizabeth Warren, she's a Democrat in Massachusetts. Gerald Nadar, he's a New York Democrat. John Katko is a Republican in New York. So just Google whoever your person is, and there's a whole bunch of other people who have co-sponsored this. There's a bunch of, other Democrats, mainly Democrats who supported it. Bernie Sanders, who's an independent. So one independent, one Republican, and a bunch of Democrats. But Google your senator for your state. Call them. Literally, it's going to be something like, hey, John Smith, this is Sam, and I live in your district. I would like you to support Student Borrower Bankruptcy Relief Act of 2019. And then they might ask you a question. You're not going to actually talk to your senator. You know that, right? Like they have an assistant or something. And that assistant's going to pick up the phone, and they're just doing data collection for the senator. So you'll call and just tell them you want to support the Student Borrower Bankruptcy Relief Act of 2019. That's it. And the more people who do that, the more support this is going to get. The more people who call their senator and put pressure on their senator to support this act, the higher likelihood something like this will be able to go through. So, anyways, I appreciate you guys. Don't forget to press that thumbs up button and subscribe while you are at it. Peace.